And I just need to be able for the screen. Thank you. All right.
Bonjour.
Good day, everyone. Hello, who's that? All right, good day, everyone. I do want to just make sure that everyone knows that we do have interpretation. Our speakers today are going to be speaking in both English and in French. So please choose the language that you would prefer to listen in, and you can do that at the icon at the bottom. So I would very much like to welcome everyone. We are delighted to have this dialogue on science, practice, and policy with a group of experts, and we'll be talking about food systems and resilience. This is an event of a Jeff-funded Resilient Food Systems program that is managed by IFAD with support and leadership from multiple agencies and organizations. And today's event is hosted by the FAO in collaboration with ICRAF and the Shared Decision Hub. My name is Constance Neely. I'm with the Shared Decision Hub, and I will serve as a facilitator for today's event. I'm also joined by colleagues Sabrina Chesterman, Emily Smith-Dumont, Romy Chevalier, and Amanda Gosling. So if you have not already done so, what we would like to invite people to do is to introduce yourself in the chat box so we all know who is with us, because sometimes the names on our screens don't say enough. So if you could type your name, affiliation, and country in the chat box, that would be brilliant. All right, I know that not everyone knows about the Resilient Food Systems Program, and I'd like to briefly introduce that. The Resilient Food Systems Program has been in place for 4 years, and it is an integrated program that focuses on transformational change within African food systems. The program's committed to fostering sustainability and resilience for food security in sub-Saharan Africa, and it emphasizes the importance of natural capital and ecosystem services to enhance agricultural productivity. It's built around 12 country projects, all of which were facing or are facing detrimental impacts from environmental degradation and unsustainable practices. And each project has been designed within its country context, aiming to reach the goals and using good approaches to resilient food systems. And here you can see a map that shows the 12 country projects. And so you can see we have quite a good coverage. The 12 country projects are brought together in a unique structure through a regional hub, which is a cross-cutting unit and whose core focus is really to coordinate across the projects to ensure that there is cross-project learning, and of course to monitor and assess progress. Now within the regional hub, we have one component on institutional frameworks, and that objective is to create and strengthen those integrated institutional frameworks, those mechanisms for scaling up proven approaches. And within that component, there is a focus on this research, practice, and policy interface. And this brings us to the objectives of today's dialogue. Today, we want to reflect upon the UN Food Systems Summit, the launch events of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and the UNFCCC COP26. Now, we want to be able to look at these different agenda and deliver some practical messages at the continental, at the country, project implementation scales to achieve resilience and to transform food systems in an integrated way and not so much in a siloed way. So just as a bit of background to that, in the graphic on the right, we know that there are implementation actions, there are goals, there are commitments, there are aspirations ranging from the local landscape level to the international, to the global level. But this year, there has been a constellation of major events, and we want to take advantage of those events. So, for example, we're now nearing the end of a year in which we have had major events on restoring landscapes and seascapes and biodiversity through the UN decade on restoration. We have advanced food systems thinking and action through the UN Food Systems Summit. And we've had the good fortune of updating evidence and deepening commitments through the IPC 6th assessment and the recently finished 26th Conference of Parties for the UNFCCC. So we'd like to focus on these three and what they mean for Africa and what they mean for existing and future projects and programs and how our efforts are and can contribute. Our program will include 2 panels. One panel will be reflecting on the UNFCCC, the UN Food Systems Summit in the decade. And a second panel will be also taking the thoughts and insights from panel 1 in their own experience and efforts and talk about opportunities to translate these agendas in an integrated way for programs. So we'll create a dialogue around that. And then we'll also want to hear from all of us around how our projects and our programs are contributing to the mechanisms and strategies to reach these targets set out in the agenda. I will stop here. I want to remind people that please do register comments and questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. And please feel free to do so throughout. So with that, I would like to now invite Anne-Sophie Poisseau, who is going to make our welcoming remarks. Anne-Sophie is from FAO. She's a program coordinator for integrated production and pest management in Africa. She is the lead on component 1, which I mentioned earlier. And Anne-Sophie, thank you for helping create this event, and you have the floor.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci, Constance. So I'll be speaking in French. So if you need interpretation, we remind you there's a globe at the bottom right of your screen. You can click on that, select English. Vraiment un très chaleureux bienvenue à toutes et à tous, où que vous soyez. Donc, je suis Anne-Sophie Poisseau, je suis la chef adjointe de l'équipe de gestion des bioagresseurs à la FAO et aussi la coordinatrice du programme Système alimentaire résilient pour la FAO. Vraiment aujourd'hui, bonjour au nom de la FAO, de l'ICRAF, du Shared Decision Hub et de tous nos partenaires, le FEM, le FIDA et nos autres agences. Je souhaite la bienvenue à tous et en particulier à nos collègues qui sont engagés dans ce programme des systèmes alimentaires résilients, RFS en anglais. On est ravis de voir beaucoup d'entre vous aujourd'hui, mais aussi d'accueillir d'autres collègues de tous horizons. Et le programme des systèmes alimentaires résilients est vraiment pour nous un partenariat important avec le FEM, avec le FIDA, avec le PNUE, le PNUD, Conservation International, Biodiversity, AGRA, beaucoup de partenaires qui se sont mis ensemble dans ce programme. Et toutes ces agences ont souhaité unir leurs efforts en Afrique avec l'appui du FEM pour piloter des approches concrètes, efficace pour contrer les multiples défis, focalisant sur le rôle des politiques et de la science pour informer les politiques. Après la COP 26 qui a interrogé et que beaucoup d'entre nous ont suivi avec un bilan un petit peu en demi-teinte malgré certains progrès, on voit que les calculs s'accordent pour dire que les émissions mondiales en 2030 seront encore 2 fois plus élevées que nécessaire pour être compatibles avec l'objectif de limiter le réchauffement climatique à 1,5 degré d'ici la fin du siècle. Et dans le même temps, selon des études récentes, On sait que la 6e extinction de masse de vie sauvage sur la Terre s'accélère. Plus de 500 espèces d'animaux terrestres sont sur au bord de l'extinction et sont susceptibles d'être perdues d'ici les 20 prochaines années. Et c'est le même nombre d'espèces qu'on a perdu en 100 ans, qu'on risque de perdre cette fois en 20 ans. Et les scientifiques nous interrogent et nous alarment que sans la destruction humaine de la nature, cela aurait pris des milliers d'années pour cette extinction, pour que cette extinction se produise. Et en particulier, nous interrogent les zones arides qui accueillent 2 milliards de personnes, c'est presque 40% de la population mondiale, avec une grande partie de la pauvreté mondiale et des forts niveaux de dégradation des écosystèmes, mais aussi une richesse humaine d'une résilience extraordinaire. Donc, sur de multiples fronts, et il y en a d'autres, je crois qu'on est vraiment devant une urgence collective. Et la communauté internationale tente de se mobiliser. Bon, on l'a dit, outre la COP qui s'achève, on a vu en juin le lancement de la décennie pour la restauration des écosystèmes sous l'égide des Nations Unies. En septembre dernier, le secrétaire général des Nations Unies a convoqué le sommet sur les systèmes alimentaires durables. Donc, pour nous, praticiennes et praticiens du développement qui sommes dans nos programmes, dans nos actions, dans nos projets engagés dans la restauration, dans la neutralité en matière de dégradation des terres au quotidien, quelles sont les implications de ces discussions au niveau international? Nous avons souhaité avoir ensemble un moment de réflexion collective avec les équipes de terrain du RFS, avec d'autres partenaires qui vont partager leurs idées, leurs suggestions. Que représentent ces sommets et ces agendas internationaux? Quelles avancées, quelles implications pour nos projets, nos actions quotidiennes? Comment se mobiliser? Est-ce qu'on doit se mobiliser différemment? Est-ce qu'on doit mettre d'autres actions en place? Et comment informer aussi ces agendas internationaux, faire remonter les leçons de terrain vers ces agendas internationaux pour avoir des décisions et des actions pratiques et des mécanismes d'action plus pertinents. Donc, c'est un peu l'invitation que nous avons donc lancée aujourd'hui à vous tous, avec en particulier 2 panels très riches, des discussions interactives où chacun pourra présenter ses idées, partager ses idées. Donc, c'est une invitation à prendre un peu de la hauteur sur nos mises en œuvre quotidiennes, une invitation à la réflexion, mais aussi une invitation à l'action, réfléchir pour mieux agir. Donc, nos 2 panels vont nous donner beaucoup un tour d'horizon, disons, de ces différents événements internationaux qui viennent de se tenir dans les derniers mois. Et nous allons avoir beaucoup de discussions ensemble pendant les 2 heures qui viennent pour pouvoir un petit peu élaborer toutes ces questions. Voilà, je vais laisser à Constance le soin d'introduire le panel qui va suivre. Et vraiment, merci à vous d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie. What a warm welcome and also a very nice stage setting for today. We greatly appreciate that. So right now, I'm delighted to introduce our first panel, and we are going to hear from 3 amazing experts. First, we have Dr. George Wamukoya, who is the team leader and leadership program director for the Africa Group of Negotiation Experts Support. And he is going to bring us insights around the COP26 and more. Then we have Dr. Manyewu Mutamba. He's the leader of the Climate Resilience Program, Africa Union Development Agency, AUDA, NEPAD. And we also have Nora Baramuni, a dear friend and colleague from FAO, who is the Senior Forestry Officer for FAO in the Africa region. So at this moment, you should be able to see our first panelist. And I would like to start off and invite, we're going to go a bit in reverse time. We're going to go with the most recent activity. So I'm going to invite George to give us his opening remarks around the climate change negotiations. We're very keen to understand your main take-home messages from the COP for Africa. And also, if you would help us understand the importance and engagement in these long-term, low-emission, climate resilient plans that the countries are working on. George, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Constance, and thanks, colleagues. Great to be part of Friends. Menyeu, how are you doing? And Nora. Yeah, I'll be very brief in terms of sharing the initial thoughts and key outcomes from the COP, so that we see the relevance with this. The first is that science has been recognized as key in informing the policy decisions, and in this regard, therefore, the IPCC reports have been found very useful. But as you all are aware, IPCC doesn't do research. It simply collates the evidence that is there and analyzes and assesses to see the level of certainty of that evidence. And therefore, I would encourage colleague scientists and experts who are on this from Africa to invest in research so that we can have published in papers in scholarly journals so that they can inform the IPCC. We keep on talking about Africa. If we don't get our own narrative through our own eyes there, then we'll blame ourselves. So science, very important. The sixth assessment report is critical in informing the subsequent actions. The second issue, of course, is adaptation. Africa is always known to be highly vulnerable to climate change, and therefore there's recognition that we must invest in adaptation in order to cushion our people and the economies. And in this regard, for all of you who are familiar with the Paris Agreement, we have the temperature goal, which is embodied in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, and we have the global goal on adaptation, which is embodied in Article 7, paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement. And if you look carefully at Article 7, paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement, it looks at the adequate adaptation response in line with the temperature goal as set out in Article 2, which means it links the adaptation and mitigation, the level of effort we do in mitigation, and the level of effort that we need to do in adaptation in order to stabilize our climate system and reduce the impacts of climate change. And in this regard, therefore, a work program, a 2-year work program has been established to work on the global, to unpack and operationalize the global goal on adaptation. As you would see from Article 7, paragraph 1, it has 3 elements. One is enhancing adaptive capacity. The second one is building climate resilience. And the third one is reducing vulnerability. So what does that mean in the reality? That is what that work program is going to be dealing with. The meeting also confirmed that the adaptation finance is inadequate, and therefore it needs to be doubled in this respect. Even though we agreed that the climate finance will be 50-50, 50 adaptation, 50 mitigation. Unfortunately, the investments have shown that there's more investments in mitigation as compared to adaptation, and that is a concern. But also we blame ourselves because if you look at, for example, the climate finance landscape in Kenya, which we just concluded early this year, it shows that even our own domestic resources is going into mitigation more than in adaptation. And yet our policies say that adaptation is a priority. And that reemphasizes we need to align our financing, including the national budgets, with the priorities, which is adaptation. Now, the elephant in the room is mitigation. You are all aware that our countries in Africa have communicated or updating their nationally determined contributions. What has been realized is that through the assessment that was done of all the updated NDCs, they put us on a trajectory of 2.4 degree. And in Africa, when you're talking about 2.4 degree increase, it means you are talking about almost 3 to 5 degrees. And that is very high. You can imagine the Northern Africa, if you add 3 degrees on Northern Africa, or even Namibia, Southern Africa, there'll be no life there. So for us, a 1.5 and below is very, very important. And as a consequence, 3 things have emerged from that. One, the meeting agreed that the NDCs need to be relooked at again next year in 2022 to try and raise ambition based on science. And I think that's important because the IPCC Working Group 2 report on impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation will be coming out early next year, and therefore it will be possible to align with that. And the intention here is to try and raise the ambition towards and reduce that gap. Remember, we must reduce the emissions by 45% by 2030. And if that has to be done, then it means that we must do more than what we have promised in the NDCs. The second that has been done there is that we have now established what you call alignment, a requirement that all countries submit their LDCs, LTSs, and align the LTSs with NDCs. And this is important because when we're constructing the Paris Agreement in 2015, that was during the intended national determined contributions, and countries were submitting with different time frames, and therefore that became very difficult in terms of assessing. And many of them were making suggestions or pledges up to 2030, but they were not showing how and when their emissions are going to peak. And that's why the long-term strategy becomes important, because then you're able to see when your emissions will peak, from which sectors, and what actions would you need to do. And therefore, re-emphasizing and reaffirming the need to do long-term strategies and aligning the long-term strategies with the NDCs, which is the instrument through which that is to be achieved, is very important. And I'm happy that some bit of work is happening in that area. And then and what is critical, of course, is with this, then it means that we will be able, of course, the UN Secretary General will be convening a summit next year to try and see if we can raise that ambition so that we are able to remain within the 1.5 degree. As it's becoming very clear, 2 degrees is already too high for Africa. Of course, there are provisions relating to finance, technology, and capacity building. And what is very clear is that the 100 billion budget money that we were promised since 2009 has not been achieved. There is indication that it will be achieved in 2023. And a process was started to establish a new target beyond the 100 billion by 2025, as set out in the Paris Agreement. And so one area that I would call upon the experts from Africa is these numbers. Do they make sense? For example, when we propose 300 billion or 500 or 600 or 800 or 3 trillion, what does that mean? And in relation to the budgets that have been are contained in the NDCs from different countries. Kenya, my country alone, requires 62 billion for the 5 years. And so if you add, and I know Ghana also requires around 60 billion. So if Kenya alone and Ghana require 120 billion, then it means our mathematics is not working. So I think I would encourage your colleagues, experts who are involved in these processes, to try and clarify what are these numbers, and maybe Manyew, you need to come in at some stage as our African Union institution. Of course, technology and capacity building, we now have very clear institutions, CTCN and the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. They are already doing quite a bit of work, and therefore they have been strengthened in that regard. Now, with respect to loss and damage, which is actually one of the critical areas that Africa went into the negotiations, and many developing countries wanted to see progress. We made some progress, but not to the level that we had thought. The intention initially was that there would be a fund established for loss and damage, but what has happened is that one, the Santiago network has been operationalized, and therefore from that we hope that it will be able to come up with that kind of funding or funds that would help us to address the loss and damage issues. And this is important because the original, if you look at the Paris Agreement carefully, you see that a large part of that has been more assumed to be from insurance. But you know, in Africa, insurance has not worked very well. So when you expect that we'll deal loss and damage through insurance, then we're like condemning our people and our economies, and therefore we need a different mechanism and a tool of such management tools that will help us. So I want to end by, because this is an agriculture food system by Coronivia, joint work on agriculture. We had very, very, very interesting discussions. We finalized the reports under the Coronivia, and therefore what is outstanding is we have to finalize the reports under the so-called New Zealand workshops, the 2 workshops on sustainable land and water management, and the one on modalities and incentives and for scaling up. And 2, we're supposed to prepare a report to the COP, highlighting the key messages from those workshops that we've had, and recommending a decision to be adopted by the COP on the future of the agriculture in the UNFCCC. We are optimistic that we'll be able to work out something, and hopefully by COP27 or at COP27 we have a decision that institutionalizes agriculture. Because our argument is, if you look at both the Paris Agreement at CO2 as read together with the convention at CO2, the only sector that is referred to in the purpose and objective is food production, which can be said to be agriculture, and therefore agriculture cannot be treated like other sectors as some have argued, and on that basis that we're trying to find space for agriculture within the UNFCCC. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take a few questions before I revert to my other meeting.
Thank you so much, George. What an incredible framing. And we really appreciate you giving us such a well-rounded view of what came out of COP. And it's very fresh. And I know that you are also must be exhausted and going right into another meeting. Perhaps what we could do, if my other colleagues on the panel, I know George has to return, could we take a couple of questions for George? If there are some before he has to go back into his other meeting. He's been very generous with his time. Lynn, I see you have a question. May I invite you to unmute and introduce yourself as well, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Constance, and thank you to Dr. George. My name is Lynn Kota from Eswatini. I just wanted to highlight that I'm really happy to hear that Dr. George saying that the NDCs have to be relooked, you know, for next year, particularly from, well, I'm going to be specific from the point of view of Eswatini, probably other African countries, in terms of the mismatch, you know, of mitigation and greenhouse gas emissions. This I am saying because while the country is trying to recover from, you know, recover the economy, you know, as a result of, you know, the COVID pandemic, and in the case of certainly the recent and still ongoing unrest in the country, I don't know whether this is proper to say, but really I want to be frank to say what's the recovery strategy for the government. Part of it is to find other means, for example, of generating electricity. And in this case, it's coal mining, you know, which really is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So really, I just wanted to say that what other means can we as a country, or, you know, as the people that are working in this sector, sort of put in some advocacy to government to actually look for other means of economic recovery without compromising what we are all trying to do, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. George, I think mining of coal went up to the very last minute. What would you offer to Lynn?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. One is coal was supposed to be phased out, but phased down. And what is emerging generally is that there's a strong movement against fossil fuel and of course coal because of the state in which we are, and it's on that basis that there is the decision covers the moving towards phasing down the use of coal, and also the subsidies on fossil fuels. Now, what does that mean for Africa? Because and the NDCs in particular, if you look at the Kenyan NDC, for example, the government had asked that in its NDC, what the Kenyan government said, it's going to do coal using its own domestic resources. Now, the implication of this decision is that even with the domestic resources, Kenya will have to look at that decision and see, if possible, to keep the coal in the soil, and look at what will be the other alternative cleaner technologies. Now, Kenya at the moment, 80%, actually 90% of the energy mix is renewable. So we have very little time to play around with. That's the reality. And so, Lynn, to answer your question, is that yes, the government of Eswatini may want to do call, but unfortunately, it's not going to attract support and funding from international market. And that means that it will have to use its own generated resources, which I doubt it will not be adequate to do that. Now, but that brings in what we normally call stranded assets. In the sense, for example, Mozambique has been is seen as having discovered the largest deposit of coal in Africa. Now, if it has that deposit and people are poor, it wants to develop, and now we're telling them not to use coal, then we must, as a global community, find a way to work with Mozambique so that they can be able to develop and at the same time do not contribute to emissions in that respect. So, Lynn, it's a very difficult question. We are watching to see how it's going to unfold. But what is very clear is that multilateral development banks and climate financing institutions are not going to fund coal, and that may be difficult for many of our countries that may want to do something, unless you are South Africa, which as part of the bargain here, they were able to get some arrangement where they are going to get several billions, almost 10 billion. To phase out, start phasing out coal, shifting from coal. But that facility may not be available to many countries in Africa, given their balance sheet in terms of their economies. So yes, it's a big issue. Coal is generally been agreed. The initial language was phasing out, but India said no. We can have it phased down, which simply means that slowly moving out of coal. But as you do so, you have to observe just transition and better jobs, cleaner jobs, and that kind of stuff. So it's something that we have to learn. Now, the other point that I derived from your question, which you didn't ask, because I know Eswatini has submitted and is working on its long-term strategies and the rest, is the question is that we just completed the indices recently, and now we're being asked to look at them next year. Where is that funding, and what's the new information, what's new evidence are we going to use to help us make deliberate change in that? Unless, because we've seen that some countries simply resubmitting their older NDC and calling it updated, and therefore we need to be aware of those. But the intention is you need to do a long-term strategy first, look at your pathways, development pathways, see the trajectory when your emissions are going to peak. And in the case of where your emissions will peak beyond 2050, you are being asked, can you bring it to 2050 by mid-century, all of us to have a net zero emission so that we are able to remain within the 1.5 degree centigrade. And of course, for agriculture sector, we don't expect net zero emission there. Is when you are looking at the economy-wide, that you find a balance, because we cannot do absolute emission reduction in agriculture, but we deal with emissions intensity in agriculture. Because whatever we do, as guided by Article 2, should not threaten food production systems. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you for the question, Lynn, and thank you for the very comprehensive response, George. I know that we're going to have to move on, but George, and I know you're trying to leave, but could I just invite you to say one more thing about the importance of a wide group of stakeholders, such as we have here with us today, of engaging in the development of the long-term plans?
Yeah, thanks, Constance. The challenge we've had is that NDCs were primarily seen as environment instrument, and therefore the other sectors were just being invited to make contribution. But however, with a long-term strategy, unfortunately, it changes that that approach. It requires each sector, for example, agriculture sector, to look at the whole food system, or whatever you call it, and then identify, first of all, define where they want to go, and look at the different pathways depending on the science, and finally choose the development pathway that will be appropriate for the country and for the need, which is agricultural productivity, food security, and all those aspects. And then move that sectoral to economy-wide, where trade-offs now will be done to ensure that those sectors that can find a balance. And that means that each one of us has to be involved, because it touches on your life, whether you are in agriculture or outside agriculture or in whatever form, it touches on you. And finally, the economy-wide requires to find a balance between the trade-offs between the different sectors, and then finally agree on the development pathway that does favor the development of the country. And therefore, I would encourage countries that have not done long-term strategy. If you're not aware your country is doing a long-term strategy, please get in touch with the ministry responsible for climate change or environment. And to the extent possible, we are encouraging that, unlike NDC, sometimes the long-term strategy is actually economy-wide, and it requires ministries of planning. Because if you don't include ministries of planning and finance, unfortunately, you not get what you want, because it will require long-term funding. Okay, yeah, it will require long-term funding. And just to give an example again from Kenya, Kenya has up to Vision 2030. Now, when you're doing a long-term strategy up to 2050, it means you're doing a successor of the Vision 2030. So the pillars that you do in climate change must be the same pillars that are going to be used by the ministries of planning to develop the successor of Vision 2030. If there's no coherence, then there will be problem in implementation. So I'll call upon colleagues that one, get involved in the sector LTSs, because they help to understand the sector better. And that's why with the support of FAO and CCAFs, we are supporting 6 countries to develop their agriculture long-term development strategies. That's Ghana, Uganda, Senegal, Kenya, Zambia, and primarily the intention is agriculture is the cornerstone of the economy. So we want to see how agriculture will behave in a changing climate, and which will be the best development pathways. And based on that, therefore, identify what will be the appropriate adaptation and mitigation options. Now, this is where the challenge comes in, Nora. I've seen some of the LTSs, but I've seen the adaptation and mitigation options be proposed similar to what has been there before. So I asked myself, what's different? Because what I expect is once you choose a development pathway, it should be able to lead you with what type of options, priority options, will deliver on that pathway. And I request that experts and more so scientists, we require evidence in this process. We require a lot of expertise. So please get involved so that you can bring on board and add value, so that Africa can have very sound long-term strategies and NDCs that will benefit us in terms of once we implement it, but also it will give us a trajectory that will help contribute to addressing the climate change problem. Thank you very much, Constance.
Superb. Thank you so much, George. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us that incredible outline of what we have before us as we head towards the, they're calling it now the Adaptation COP, which will be in Africa. So thank you again, George, for joining in, and thank you for the patience of my dear panelists for allowing George to take those questions now. So I'm excited now to invite Manyewu, Dr. Mutamba. He has just also been very involved in the COP. I kept seeing your name popping up everywhere, and but also with the Food Systems Summit and the country level dialogues. And so I'm very keen to hear sort of that bridge, that how can transformed and resilient food systems in Africa help address the environmental, the social, and the economic priorities of Africa. Thank you. Manyewu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Constance. Good afternoon to all colleagues, and thanks for inviting me to this session. And also to my colleague and friend, Dr. Omkoya, for giving us the very nice and detailed background in terms of what's been happening at the COP, some of the, the nuts and bolts in terms of the negotiations, the place of agriculture and food systems, and also in terms of the direction that the negotiators are seeing, particularly with respect to the agriculture sort of work stream. Just to say that I completely agree with George, and I probably would respond to a few of the the issues that he threw onto the table in terms of really the justification for agriculture and food systems to be at the center of climate negotiations, and not to be treated like any other sector. I know there are sectoral, negativities around, should we be bringing sectors into it? So I agree with the take and also the justification from George in terms of, agriculture being too central, it being just, almost the backbone of, how we are going to transform economies and communities. If we get it right in agriculture, I believe that we are going to, make huge advances with respect to a whole range of NDCs that we've aligned for ourselves. So if we can take advantage of the experts like George who sit in the negotiations, to really ensure that agriculture remains at the center of these negotiations. I'm glad to hear that going forward, given the Coronivia joint work on agriculture is actually reaching a point where they are going to recommend a decision to the COP. Hopefully next year they've committed, so we're going to hold them to that commitment. I think it's a major step, and I think it's also something that continues to bring agriculture onto the center of the climate negotiations. With respect to the climate finance, I share very similar concerns to George with respect to the adequacy of the amounts that have been expressed. They sound like big amounts, but in the scheme of things, and given the scale of the challenge that we face, there's a need to relook at those figures. But also for me, from an African perspective, it's also a wake-up call, especially when you even look at some of the admissions in terms of a failure to even meet the modest commitments of 100 billion, that was on the table for 2020. So that failure already is a wake-up call for us, I think, particularly coming from Africa, that perhaps we need to think deeper, and we need to look broader and wider in terms of solutions to funding adaptation, particularly in the ag sector. I think there's a lot of work that is required. And some of the points that George actually made with respect to mobilizing, domestic resources, and I think the potential of the private sector, to really drive some of the, adaptation actions that we require. in Africa, I think would be a major, area of work that we really need to apply ourselves, because it is clear that international financing mechanisms for climate change are going to battle, are going to struggle, to provide the resources that are required. Issues around the transparency in terms of how, the money is accounted for, what's new, what's what's old, what's existing. And I should also add, that from our perspective, from an African perspective, another area of work is also around the efficiency in terms of how we deploy these resources to really get the bang for the buck. Because personally, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that this money filters to where it is needed most, and we do that efficiently. And our prioritization and our understanding of the needs and the levers that are going to actually, push the transformation that we anticipate and we expect in food systems. We need to do a better job in deploying those resources and ensuring that they can actually trigger system changes that are going to be far-reaching beyond the initial investment. So just to go back a bit into the Food System Summit, of course, we are heavily involved in that as well. And from our own perspective as AUD and NEPAD, this is for us a key moment and a key opportunity in terms of bringing the food systems perspective and issues onto the agenda, and really bringing much needed impetus and drive to actually focus or refocus on these issues in terms of how do we get ourselves out of the situation that we are in as Africa, given the potential for the transformative power of food systems to drive the NDCs, whether it's around poverty, whether it's around ending hunger, whether it's around ensuring health and well-being, or just protecting nature. I think the potential is huge, but again, I think we need to emphasize that unless there's adaptation, unless we build resilience in these systems, as per our initial discussion, we are not going to see that potential, and perhaps many of the the benefits that could come out of a transformed food system will be lost. And so the link for me, the link between the food, the work we've been doing on sustainable food systems and the ongoing work on climate negotiation, that link is key. And for me, that's almost the bridge that's going to get us to to the promised land in terms of delivering for people, for the planet, and for prosperity in general. There's huge potential for food systems to deliver on these fronts, but we need to build on a solid adaptation and resilience building, agenda and capacity building. And we really counting on the climate negotiations to come to the party to support that agenda and take us forward. Yeah, so from the Food Systems Summit again, good, and I think good outcomes as well, in terms of really the emphasis on us getting on top of the implementation, because already we have put together building blocks. We've been supporting member states to to identify some of the key building blocks that need to be a part of the pathways to transforming food systems. But we need to do a better job as Africa, and perhaps in other parts of the world as well, in terms of implementing the key and the important things that we've identified. So there are a number of areas that we really need to work on, and as AUD and NEPAD, we're already gearing ourselves through negotiations and support with our partners to come up with a continental program up to 2030 that really looks at how are we going to really implement some of the suggestions, some of the actions, and some of the priorities that have been expressed by countries in their national national priority papers, in their national pathways. So we are gearing ourselves to support that process. And we have a program with support of our partners during next year to really come up with a long-term program in terms of how we are going to support member states in delivering transformed food systems on the continent. Let me stop there and thank you very much. I'll be happy to take on any questions. Thank you, Constance.
Thank you so much, Manyewa. That was great. And we really appreciate how quickly you integrated the climate change adaptation mitigation and moving into these transformed food systems. With your permission, what I'd like to do is invite Nora, and then we'll open it for questions for both of you. Nora, I'm so happy that you could also join us today. And we've invited you to talk a bit about the decade on ecosystem restoration, principles and practices for restoring the landscapes, and how they can support addressing climate change and food systems. So Nora, thank you, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Constance. Je vais maintenant parler en français pour pouvoir équilibrer un peu nos voix, qu'il y ait une diversité sur cette plateforme. Et je te remercie, Constance, et tous les collègues qui m'ont invité à prendre part à ce panel et à cette discussion qui apparemment, au fait, elle commence déjà à être très, très riche avec les réflexions des collègues tels que Georges et Manéou. La décennie pour la restauration la décennie des Nations Unies pour la restauration des écosystèmes 2021-2030 qui a été au fait adoptée durant l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies en mars 2020, mais qui a effectivement été lancée en juin cette année, donc 2021, avec comme partenaires qui sont en train en fait de coordonner la mise en œuvre, mais bien sûr avec plein d'autres partenaires, donc c'est la FAO et le PNUE, mais bien sûr avec plein d'autres partenaires, l'IUCN et d'autres organisations des Nations Unies et différentes organisations de recherche, d'institutions nationales, régionales, internationales. Et tous les mouvements, au fait, aussi des jeunes et les mouvements de femmes et d'hommes qui sont en train de travailler sur ces efforts-là. Au fait, cette décennie est une réponse à deux défis essentiels. Même si le titre de la décennie, il parle de restauration des écosystèmes, au fait, dans cette décennie, on regarde deux côtés. Un premier côté, c'est vraiment protéger ce qui vit encore, donc protéger les écosystèmes terrestres et marins et d'eau douce qui sont encore, disons, en bonne santé. Donc, il ne faut vraiment pas les perdre. Donc, c'est essentiel d'arrêter la dégradation, la perte de la biodiversité. Et puis, le deuxième côté, c'est aussi de réparer, donc de restaurer toutes les terres qui ont été dégradées. Et on parle bien sûr des terres dégradées à l'échelle du paysage ou du territoire, impliquant les zones urbaines, les zones rurales, les terres agricoles, les terres forestières, les terres pastorales et ainsi de suite. Et bien sûr, l'Afrique, je souhaiterais dire vraiment, Constance, que l'Afrique n'a pas attendu que cette décennie soit en place pour agir. Au fait, il y a eu déjà de grands efforts qui ont été déjà placés et investis auparavant par différents pays et les acteurs sur le terrain. Et les plus récentes, d'ailleurs, ça fait une décennie au moins, plus d'une décennie, on a par exemple la Commission de l'Union africaine qui a lancé, adopté cette grande initiative de la Grande Muraille verte pour le Sahara et le Sahel, qui d'ailleurs maintenant, elle fait chemin au niveau de l'Afrique du Nord, mais aussi au niveau de l'Afrique australe. Et bien sûr, il y a nos collègues de Aoudané, pas d'ici, donc il y a aussi l'initiative AFR 100, donc l'initiative de la restauration des paysages forestiers, donc qui a pour objectif, qui vise à restaurer 100 millions d'hectares d'ici 2030. Et puis, il y a aussi ce plan d'action ou ce programme d'action pour la restauration des écosystèmes, pour construire une résilience, la résilience donc en Afrique, et qui a été aussi porté par Aoudanepad, par l'Union africaine, à travers la Convention de la biodiversité. Donc, tout ceci pour dire que la restauration n'est pas nouvelle. Mais ce que nous ramène ou ce que nous offre comme opportunité cette décennie qui a commencé maintenant, c'est vraiment de speeder ou de booster les efforts déjà engagés. Et bien sûr, pour aider à développer et transformer nos systèmes alimentaires en Afrique et la résilience en Afrique pour nos communautés. Et bien sûr, la clé, je n'ai pas entendu ce mot aujourd'hui de nos collègues d'avant, Georges et Maniéou. Donc, ma petite pierre que je souhaiterais, ou bien grande pierre que je souhaiterais mettre sur la table, c'est la biodiversité. Donc, restaurer la biodiversité, utiliser durablement la biodiversité, protéger la biodiversité. Parce que, au fait, nos systèmes alimentaires sont menacés par cette dégradation de la biodiversité qui est par ailleurs engendrée par ces systèmes alimentaires actuels. Parce que, par exemple, en Afrique, on perd des forêts chaque année, on perd 3,9 millions, près de 4 millions d'hectares par an, depuis entre 2010 et 2020. Donc, c'est beaucoup, hein, c'est une perte vraiment phénoménale là. Donc, il faut vraiment arrêter. Et ça, c'est à cause de l'agriculture, de l'expansion de l'agriculture et à cause, bien sûr, avec d'autres menaces. Donc, ça, c'est important de le souligner. Et les principes, Constance, c'est-à-dire, vous m'avez invité de discuter un peu comment ces principes de la décennie des Nations Unies pour la restauration des écosystèmes pourraient aider à restaurer ou à transformer nos systèmes alimentaires qui ne sont pas fonctionnels aujourd'hui comme on le souhaiterait. Eh bien, ces principes, au fait, il y en a au moins une dizaine. Et ils sont tous ancrés et basés sur les expériences, sur les leçons apprises, sur les acquis, les expériences réussies et non réussies que nous avions eu à mettre en œuvre auparavant par nos pays ou par nos partenaires. Donc, le premier principe, bien sûr, et je pense que ça aidera exactement cette transformation des systèmes alimentaires, c'est la contribution globalement aux ODD, aux objectifs de développement durable, et en synergie les objectifs des conventions, d'une part des Nations Unies, donc la Convention 4 des Nations Unies pour sur le changement climatique, d'autre part la Convention des Nations Unies de lutte contre la désertification, et troisièmement aussi la Convention de la biodiversité. L'un des principes prône l'inclusion en termes de genre, de jeunes, d'acteurs, l'équité, l'engagement, la participation de toutes et de tous à travers tous les secteurs dans le processus de restauration pour transformer vraiment nos systèmes alimentaires. Elle prône aussi, le principe, c'est la diversification. Il y a la biodiversité d'une part, donc la diversité biologique qui aiderait à réellement développer la résilience et transformer et enrichir nos systèmes alimentaires, la sécurité alimentaire, la sécurité nutritionnelle, mais aussi il y a d'autres types de diversité qui sont les diversités des actions en matière de, par exemple, restauration des sols, préparation des sols, collecte de l'eau, des pratiques agroécologiques qui prennent en considération l'agrobiodiversité, mais aussi qui protègent les espèces, les plantes, telles que ce soit des arbres ou des arbustes ou des herbacées, donc, ou bien que ce soit dans les systèmes urbains ou que ce soit dans les systèmes ruraux, dans les océans et dans les terres. Donc, ça, c'est très, très important. Donc, la restauration, vraiment, il n'y a pas une seule, comment dire, une seule recette. Donc, c'est toute une multitude, une mosaïque d'utilisation des terres, une mosaïque d'actions complémentaires qui pourraient, disons, répondre à la transformation de nos systèmes. L'autre principe, c'est vraiment de s'assurer que l'on parle, c'est-à-dire que l'on génère des bénéfices pour l'environnement, donc pour la nature, pour la conservation de la biodiversité et aussi à l'adaptation du changement climatique et à l'atténuation du changement climatique, mais d'autre part aussi des bénéfices pour les personnes, pour leur bien-être socio-économique. Donc, on doit vraiment être intentionnel dans disons, la réalisation de ces objectifs-là et certainement être sûr que la santé et l'intégrité de nos écosystèmes, qu'ils soient naturels ou c'est agricoles, par exemple. L'autre principe, normalement, j'aurais dû commencer par ce principe qui est très, très important, c'est traiter les causes à la racine de la perte, de la dégradation de la biodiversité quand on parle de restauration. Okay? Parce que on ne peut pas restaurer, planter, faire des améliorations d'un côté et continuer à perdre des terres chaque année de l'autre côté. Donc, il faudrait vraiment qu'on harmonise nos approches, qu'on harmonise, qu'on intègre la dimension de biodiversité dans les systèmes agricoles si l'on veut vraiment transformer nos systèmes alimentaires. Parce que la biodiversité, c'est vraiment la clé, la vraie clé, l'allié de la lutte contre le changement climatique, la désertification, même la lutte contre la pauvreté et d'autres problèmes. L'autre diversité qui est intéressante aussi à souligner, c'est la diversité des connaissances. Donc, il faudrait vraiment être volontaire et être vraiment engagé à prendre en compte toutes les formes des connaissances, qu'elles soient des connaissances au niveau local, traditionnel, scientifique, de différents chercheurs, de l'apprentissage par l'action, ce qu'on appelle un peu learning by doing, pour faire un échange continu et adapter nos actions basées sur les leçons et les acquis. Et je pense que cette plateforme aujourd'hui que vous nous offrez, Constance et les collègues, est vraiment une bonne plateforme d'échange de ces connaissances et ça doit être continu à différents niveaux. Bien sûr, il faudrait, quand on parle de transformation des écosystèmes, de nos systèmes alimentaires et bien sûr à travers la restauration des écosystèmes, il faut qu'on ait vraiment tout au départ des objectifs clés, mesurables sur le court, le moyen et long terme. Et c'est des objectifs qui doivent être, comme je disais, parce qu'on veut avoir des bénéfices socio-économiques et environnementaux. Donc, il faut vraiment des objectifs mesurables en termes écologiques, culturels et socio-économiques. Et bien sûr, adaptés au contexte local et du territoire. Et bien sûr, tout ce travail-là doit être certainement développé et mené avec un bon système de suivi et d'évaluation qui pourrait nous enseigner sur les progrès, sur les impacts et corriger ce qui est à corriger et repliquer ce qui est à repliquer. Et ce qui me ramène à dire aussi, et c'est ça ce que disaient nos collègues pour répondre à nos collègues Georges et Manu, c'est très important de travailler à créer un environnement favorable pour s'assurer de la durabilité des résultats ou des objectifs que l'on souhaite réaliser et puis, bien sûr, mettre à l'échelle et déployer ces actions. Et quand on parle d'environnement favorable, on parle de politique. Donc, il faut vraiment des politiques sectorielles, intersectorielles, harmonisées qui visent le même objectif, d'une part l'adaptation et l'atténuation du changement climatique, d'autre part la conservation de la biodiversité, d'autre part le développement socio-économique, l'équité du genre, la santé, etc., etc. Donc tout ça doit être vraiment bien, disons, harmonisé. Et bien sûr, c'est très, très difficile. C'est très, très difficile. Mais je pense que la meilleure façon, c'est d'avoir cette façon de réfléchir qu'on appelle système. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut arrêter de travailler uniquement chaque secteur seul, mais vraiment travailler avec l'approche système qui intègre les besoins et les problèmes des différents secteurs pour qu'on puisse trouver, disons, des solutions qui pourraient être bonnes pour tous. Et dernièrement, je voudrais juste dire que bien sûr, ces politiques vont certainement et ces stratégies devraient normalement aussi être appuyées par des investissements, par des mécanismes d'investissement qui seraient accessibles à tous, aux paysans, aux différents groupes, aux différents secteurs, ainsi de suite. Et bien sûr, vous me dites, oh Nora, tu es en train de parler de beaucoup de principes, mais je vous l'assure, ces principes fonctionnent. Ils fonctionnent. Déjà, on a un exemple vivant à travers l'initiative de la Grande Muraille Verte africaine pour le Sahel. Nous avons travaillé en tant que FAO main dans la main avec les pays, des agences nationales de la Grande Muraille Verte, l'agence panafricaine de la Grande Muraille Verte, les acteurs au niveau local, les maires, les communautés et les ONG, et on a pu développer un modèle de restauration qui vraiment met ses principes en action, en mettant les communautés au cœur de l'action, l'inclusion, la biodiversité, en utilisant la riche biodiversité locale du Sahel, qui est vraiment adaptée au contexte, et aussi de la biodiversité qui est utile pour l'alimentation, pour la médecine, pour le pâturage, pour les produits forestiers non ligneux, ainsi de suite. Donc, vraiment, ça peut marcher, mais bien sûr, on est en train de travailler avec nos partenaires et avec tous les partenaires maintenant que tout le monde, et nous sommes très heureux de voir que la Grande Muraille Verte, elle est en train de prendre un élan encore renouvelé avec tous les engagements de la COP26 et d'avant et de One Planet Summit en janvier à Paris. Eh bien, cet élan doit être vraiment canalisé pour être sûr que ces modèles qui fonctionnent, donc les modèles de restauration basés sur la biodiversité, basés sur les communautés, ainsi de suite, l'agroécologie, ainsi de suite, soient vraiment mis en pratique sur des terres un peu plus larges, sur des zones un peu plus grandes, et bien sûr appuyées par des politiques saines et harmonieuses. Et je vais tout à l'heure, peut-être pour ne pas prendre beaucoup de temps, je sais qu'on est un peu en retard, tout à l'heure je vais vous mettre des liens, je vais dans le chat sur des publications et des informations sur la décennie de la biodiversité, sur les écosystèmes, la restauration des écosystèmes, mais aussi sur ce que le travail fait en termes de restauration au niveau de l'Afrique, mais aussi surtout dans le cadre de la Grande Muraille Verte. D'ailleurs, aujourd'hui, je me réjouis de vous dire que nous avons lancé, il y avait un PR là sur Nature qui vient de sortir, qui vraiment fait ressortir quand on fait le travail juste, on peut avoir des gains et des retours d'investissement dans le domaine de la restauration. Donc, je vais aussi vous mettre le lien aujourd'hui. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Je pense que je vais m'arrêter là.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Nora. You have jammed a lot of great insights with enthusiasm for us and showed how readily we are able to bring these links together. And the fact that we're not starting from scratch, right, by any means. I know that you have been working with the Great Green Wall for as long as I've known you, and I'm guessing that's quite a number of years. So thank you so much for that. And I would like to, I know I your trusted facilitator is let everyone go over, because I think that we've really made some headway here. And I wanted to quickly ask a question of Maniewu, and then I'm going to see if we have additional comments for Nora, and then I'm going to bring our other colleagues into this same space for those of you that can stay with us. So Maniewu, thank you again. You have been so deeply involved in the food systems work. And on this call, we have a number of country projects that are focusing in on sustainable land management. This is also what you've just spoken about, Nora, resilience, food systems. How can projects and initiatives actually link to continental programs, and perhaps, and really, are there plans for capacity building related to this, to food systems?
Thanks, Constance, for the opportunity again. Just to say yes to your question with respect to capacity building. We, as I mentioned earlier, we are actually in the process of developing a continental program, and one of the three pillars of that program centers on knowledge and capacity building. So it's definitely something that is on the radar in terms of our planning, and also in terms of the expressed need following the engagements and the national dialogue processes that took place ahead of the summit. So there is definitely that realization that capacity building needs to be a big part of how we start driving the transition. And obviously I'm very happy that Nora brought in the angle of the restoration angle, and obviously we are in the center of Africa's restoration efforts. I'm sure Nora, would have also mentioned our role within the Secretariat of the AFR 100. So for us, we see restoration efforts and other landscape initiatives as a big part of the food systems sort of understanding, and the transformation needs to happen at all those parts of the chain. So yes, definitely we see that as part of what we need to deliver if we are to to support the transformation across the continent. Thank you, Constance.
Thank you, Maniewu. And Nora, you have something to add?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing the capacities. Of course, part of the actions that are needed, and this is one, of course, of the principles of the UN Decade, is really developing the capacities of, the actors, and not just the technical capacities, but also the functional, looking at the different dimensions, whether it's the enabling environment, the policies, the institutional capacity, as well as, of course, of the people, of the individual. So I think this is important to add. And we are working very, very closely with the Secretariat of AFR 100, for example, and of course, the Pan-African Agency of the Great Green Wall and national agencies of the Great Green Wall. Together, so with Mamadou Diakité, your colleague Maniewu, to develop what we have done, what we call in the context of this decade for Africa, a capacity assessment, needs assessment, and also we are working on the capacity development based on that assessment. And the assessment was done in a way, in a participatory way, with surveys from different, communities and so on. And we will be hopefully be ready to publish this before the end of the year, together with AUDA-NEPAD. So this is one thing that I wanted to add. And of course, a lot has been done, of course, in terms of capacities on, from restoration, for example, from planning to implementing to seeds to restoration techniques, including natural regeneration and active planting, monitoring, evaluation, and so on and so forth. So I think capacity development, we will not, and I don't like to call it capacity building, I really call it capacity development, because there are capacities on the ground. And we need to
Excellent.
we should not start from scratch.
All right, thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. I had trained myself at one point and then I went back to capacity building. So thank you. Capacity development. What I'd love to do now is to invite our other panel to join in. And so at this moment, I would like to invite back Anne-Sophie Poisseau, who you've already met. I am also inviting Dr. Ravi Prabhu, who's the Director of Innovation, Investment, and Impact with C4 ICRAF. I know he's had a slight challenge with his internet, but I hope he can join. And Jonki Tenu, please, the Task Manager for the Resilient Food Systems Program, and he is with IFAD. And also Jean-Marc Sinasamy, and he is a senior environmental specialist with the Jeff Secretariat. So we're delighted to welcome you to join this panel. And I hope that I would just invite that if Ravi is able to come back on, please bring him into the spotlight. Ravi, yes, we have introduced you and we would love for you to join in for this panel. And Manyewu and Nora, if you can stay with us, we would be delighted. If you have to sign off for other commitments, I completely understand, as I have let us go long into the hours.
I'm
So,
here. No problem.
Okay, superb. All right. Thank you. All right. So our new panelists, and I'm excited to hear from all of you. What I'd really like to have is any initial reflections that you might have on what you've heard so far, but as importantly, what are, from your experiential, from your institutional perspectives, what are opportunities for translating these agendas into an integrated way, particularly for those that are trying to link science, practice, and policy, such as this resilient food systems. So I am going to ask you to just speak for a few minutes, and I will be delighted. And I know that we're starting to secure some questions in the chat box. Anne-Sophie, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Constance. The good news is that there are leverage points for investments that address in an integrated manner these agendas, these issues of climate change mitigation, adaptation, ecosystems restoration, protecting biodiversity, and transition to sustainable food systems, and entry points for action that enable multiple benefits on these fronts. And I think regreening our landscapes is such an entry point, but together with agriculture, an agriculture that is regenerative, integrating the restoration, the protection, and the food security agenda for people. And that means agriculture that's not based on standardized monoculture, that tend to mine natural resources, or not based on our metrics. And then our metrics in agriculture remains yield of one crop per hectare, but instead moving to agroecological, diversified crop, livestock, trees, farming systems. Productive agroforestry systems, agriculture and grazing that keeps soils covered at all times. And I think one such precious leverage points for multiple benefits, to find it, we just need to look down beneath our feet. We need to invest in rebuilding our soil sponge. Soils store more carbon than all plants and the atmosphere combined. And so in addition to reducing emissions and reforestation, as lowly as it may sound, we need to focus on restoring our soils, because it's the basic infrastructure that makes life on land possible. And communities and regions that regenerate the health of their soils expect fewer floods and wildfires, less need for irrigation, higher food production, food security and nutrition, more biodiversity, more moderate temperatures, cleaner, more abundant water supplies, cleaner air, less erosion, silting of dams, and less spending on infrastructure and repairs and on disaster recovery. And for this, science has, I think, a huge role to play. I mean, we've probably characterized maybe just 1% of soil bacteria to really understand how soil function. But collectively, family farms, if we could double soil organic carbon on the 475 or so millions of smallholder farms, we could actually probably compensate for all anthropogenic atmospheric carbon. So how do we do that? How do we support such leverage action points that have multiple benefits for all of these challenges we have been discussing today? So maybe a few reflections from our FAO work on policies, science, markets, and participatory education. I think three things maybe. The first one, it's about people. I think we need to accept that we have to invest in co-constructing local solutions rather than hoping that, you know, one technology is going to be adapted or solve the problems, or one approach is going to solve across the board. So we need to have for this the support of science, but science in development, science embedded in working with farmers and co-constructing local solutions. In FAO, we've been doing farmer field schools for over 30 years now in over 100 countries, and it's based on discovery learning and supporting farmers to innovate and to lead experimentations with scientists and advisory services. And ICRAF also does beautiful work implementing these notions of science in development. And really, science is not produced in isolation. It influences society, but the way it's produced is also embedded in its society. So we need to invest in these local innovations with different scientific disciplines. I think there's no shortcut. The second thing is, of course, that we need enabling policies. And the first aspect of that is, of course, multi-stakeholder platform, breaking the silos, but that's not so easy. And I think we all experimented that in our resilient food systems and the rest of our work. Breaking silos is not easy across ministries and different agendas and interests. And for this, I think we need to treat this as a skill. And we need to support champion silo breakers. You know, we need to invest in training people, in changing perspectives, and that means also at local level. A lot of our project agendas are about integrating agriculture and climate and environment, natural resources at local community level, but scarcely do we invest in who is going to do that. Who are the champions who are going to facilitate these approaches at community level? And so that's my plea, is that we need to build these capacities locally. And the third point I'd like to make is also that we need to rethink our approach to how markets are enabling these transitions. And I think we seriously need to look beyond value chains of one monocrop towards sustainable food systems. And that's why we say it's about sustainable food systems, because sustainable value chains are not enough. They are important pathways, but they can also push farmers into a continuation of monocultures. And so one critical pathway is also to relocalize markets and develop market instruments through territorial development that promote market outlets for multiple products from a farm, rather than pushing farmers into specialization. And consumer awareness and markets can be a great driver for sustainability, but with working in FAO with local food systems as well to support diversification. And of course, all of these mean tailored approach, locally specific approaches, and a lot of experimentation and learning as we go. But I think we need to embrace this complexity as a source of learning, as an opportunity, rather than be scared by this complexity and try to standardize approach. I think we need to realize this as development actors. This complexity is what is going to bring us the solution. And we shouldn't shy away in our development projects in making the human resources investments to really help tailoring of local approaches. So I think that's what is my take home.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie. We really appreciate what you've just said about these skills and the importance of these boundary partners, right? These boundary actors that can help bridge across stakeholders and sectors. And I greatly appreciate that. And I also noted that you teed up our next speaker quite nicely. Our colleague, Dr. Ravi Prabhu from C4 ICRAF, and you talked about science and you talked about agroforestry. And so I'd love to hear from Ravi now about your take home and how you see the opportunities to integrate these agendas into future work. Ravi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Constance, and all the speakers that went before me, George, Maniewu, Nora, Anne-Sophie twice. It was nice to see all of you and to hear from you. I hope you can hear from me because my connection here in Bonn is a little bit up and down. So at some stage you might see me disappear off the screen, but I will be with you in spirit and voice, hopefully. So I've got 7 takeaway messages that I can offer, and I can see my screen is frozen. So I'm going to just take off my video if you can hear me, so that we can get.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. So I really appreciated George, Maniewu, and Nora's framing, and I could not disagree with a single word that Anne-Sophie just said. So, you know, hopefully what I'm saying is complementary. The first thing that we have seen from the UN Food System Summit, from COP26, and is the limit to which governments can get to. Governments have reached a framing solution, but they have not reached the final solution. So I think we need to, as professionals, scientists, implementers, understand that it is up to us to take things beyond where governments have capacity to go, within the framing and resources. So what do I mean by that? So my second point, we need to develop models at scale that deliver the kinds of multiple benefits that Anne-Sophie was talking about. These models will build on the kinds of multiple benefits we can get from agroecosystems, from forests, agriculture, agroforests, by combining assemblages of species with practices, so that we are not just delivering products and commodities, but also services. We are suffering from an over-commodification of nature, and we need to step back from that. I think we have already seen models that can deliver both commodities and ecosystem services and support well-being, but this takes innovation. So that's my third message. Whatever we can do, we can talk about capacity strengthening or development, but ultimately we're talking about innovation, because without innovation and local innovation, there can be no context-specific adaptation. So these models must be at scale, must drive innovation, must work on the intrinsic possibilities of plants and animals to adapt and deliver results. My fourth point is about collective action. We're not going to get this done if we just sit down and wait for somebody else to do it. We've got to get out and do it. And indeed, if there's anything we've learned, it is collective action that is taking us forward. We spoke about the Great Green Wall in the context of Nora's engagement with it. I would like to speak about a project that involves collective action among scientists, NGOs, governments. Look, it's the Africa Regreening Project that ICRAF is privileged to host across 8 countries, where very different kinds of actors are putting their heads together to find solutions that they did not know existed at the beginning of the project. And I think this is the kind of flexibility that we need. So we need collective action amongst all kinds of stakeholders. In this collective action, let us leave space for South-South collaboration. Because from countries as far apart as the Gambia or Eritrea, from North Africa, from Algeria down to Southern Africa, and across the world, there are examples, and if we are willing to be open to them in similar ecologies and similar situations, we can learn from them. So as part of the collective action, let's include South-South collaboration. Then my next point is about stewardship. Our context so far are pushing our farmers to be farm laborers, farm producers, and not stewards of the land. They were stewards of the land. And in fact, where you find forests or intact agricultural systems, it is because stewardship, this duty of care, the duty of nurture towards nature has persisted. Where you've turned farming into factories, you have lost more than you have gained. So we need to centralize the concept of stewardship and start finding ways to reward it. We are starting at ICRAF to talk about the stewardship economy, an economy that rewards both services and commodities and finds a balance amongst them, but has people in its focus. If we don't reward and understand what people need, we are not going to have the solutions we look for. And my very final point is on time. We're out of time, and yet we need more time. Let us not be impatient. Anything with nature takes time, but let us also not be too patient. Let's get going because we need solutions fast. So those were my messages. I was privileged to hear the other speakers, and I will look forward, internet permitting, to what my following speakers have to say. Constance, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you for that very succinct set of very enlightening approaches that you would like us to take on. And I see you're getting a lot of applause and thumbs up from the crowd. So, and I hope your internet will stay with us. I would now like to turn our attention to Jonki Tenu from IFAD. And we're delighted to hear from you. What is your view of the way forward to integrate, to respond to these agendas, and actually get more done faster?
Okay, thank you very much, Constance. Thank you for organizing this event that I find very interesting and very helpful for the second phase of AI People Security Program. But let me continue in French. I think the language that will be very key. So, merci beaucoup et merci. Je pense que les discussions étaient très enrichissantes depuis le début jusqu'à présent. Et je pense qu'à travers les différentes interventions, j'ai noté des aspects clés. J'ai noté dans la présentation ou le feedback sur la COP, la question liée à la finance. Et j'ai noté aussi qu'à travers les différentes discussions, nous avons effectivement envie de pouvoir supporter nos petits producteurs à adopter des pratiques et des techniques résilientes. Mais tout cela doit être accompagné par le financement. Là où je suis parfaitement d'accord du fait que nous devons créer des conditions ou des financements innovants pour pouvoir supporter nos produits producteurs à adopter les pratiques innovantes liées au climat, que ce soit les pratiques basées sur la nature. Et cela, nous devons inviter le secteur privé dans la discussion. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, les ressources nationales et aussi les fonds multilatéraux ne peuvent pas à eux seuls provoquer les transformations que nous souhaitons sur le continent. Et donc, il faudra inviter le secteur privé. Et pour que le secteur privé arrive, il faudra aussi créer des conditions pour que ce secteur privé-là puisse opérer efficacement. Et je pense que nos gouvernements doivent jouer ce rôle-là, créer des conditions, créer des émulations pour que le secteur privé puisse contribuer véritablement à financer les solutions fondées sur la nature. C'est un élément important. Le programme Food Security est en train de travailler sur tous ces aspects-là, mais nous savons que nous devons faire plus que ce que nous faisons actuellement. Bon, pour ce qui concerne le FIDA, je pense que le FIDA a lancé tout récemment un programme que nous appelons la résilience au niveau rural. C'est un programme qui rassemble presque 3 autres programmes, notamment le programme d'adaptation qui est une seconde phase, donc d'un programme qui a été implémenté il y a de cela plusieurs années, un autre programme sur le Great Green Wall qui est évoqué tout à l'heure par Nora et un autre programme sur la durabilité, la stabilité, la sécurité. N'oubliez pas que nous essayons de promouvoir des approches résilientes, mais il faut que ces approches-là s'opèrent dans des conditions où il n'y a pas le conflit, il n'y a pas la sécurité, et la sécurité aussi peut influencer efficacement sur ce que nous faisons. Donc, c'est un programme qui envisage de mobiliser plus de 500 millions de dollars d'ici 2025 pour soutenir la transformation du secteur rural. J'ai noté également dans les discussions les éléments sur la connaissance et le transfert de technologie que je trouve un élément important, surtout que nous sommes dans un contexte de COVID. Les innovations technologiques en termes d'adaptation sont aussi importantes et que nous devons regarder et effectivement les utiliser comme des approches de solutions qui pourraient nous aider à intégrer tous ces éléments-là. La connaissance, bien sûr, et j'apprécie les autres intervenants qui disent qu'il faut aussi donner une priorité à la coopération sud-sud. Je pense que nous en faisons déjà à travers le programme, mais nous devons en faire beaucoup plus de manière à ce que toutes les connaissances nouvelles qui sortent donc de la recherche scientifique, ces connaissances puissent fertiliser donc les éléments, les interventions que nous faisons sur le terrain. Et d'où l'interface science et politique est très importante pour nous parce que il faut que de nouvelles recherches puissent nous aider justement à influencer les décisions politiques, que ce soit au niveau national ou au niveau régional. C'est un élément important sur lequel nous devons aussi mettre un accent. Et j'ai apprécié quand Nora disait que les secteurs ne doivent plus travailler seuls, il faut les mettre ensemble. Elle reconnaît que c'est quand même difficile et j'avoue que c'est difficile, mais je voudrais la rassurer que c'est ce que nous faisons depuis plus de 4 ans déjà à travers notre programme pour mettre ensemble tous ces secteurs, tous ces acteurs à parler ensemble et à pouvoir identifier des approches innovantes qui vont permettre une transformation beaucoup plus large donc, de nos écosystèmes. Et à travers cela, toutes les approches sont intéressantes pour nous. Approches basées sur les écosystèmes, approches basées sur le paysage, les solutions basées sur la nature. Tous ces éléments-là sont importants et c'est ce que nous essayons justement d'appliquer à travers nos programmes. Donc, le passage à l'échelle est un élément important sur lequel nous devons mettre un accent. Il n'est plus, c'est vrai, la science se base toujours sur des expériences au niveau micro, mais après ça, il faut chercher justement à aller à l'échelle pour faire des transformations souhaitées sur le terrain. Il y a un élément également qui est ressorti dans les discussions, c'est la durabilité des résultats. Et je pense que Nora a fait cas de cela aussi, et c'est ce que nous faisons également à travers nos plateformes multi-acteurs que nous promotons, que nous mettons en place, que ce soit au niveau régional, au niveau de nos pays, parce que nous sommes convaincus que dès que les acteurs se mettent sur la même table et qui parlent ensemble, ils pourraient identifier des pratiques, des politiques, influencer des politiques qui puissent permettre à nos interventions de pouvoir continuer à exister, même si nos projets ne sont pas là. Et je pense que c'est ce que nous faisons depuis, mais nous reconnaissons qu'il faudra encore mettre un accent là-dessus et vraiment porter ça à l'échelle. Je vais terminer sur les questions de mainstreaming, les questions de genre, les questions de la jeunesse. Je pense que c'est aussi important. Nous ne pouvons pas faire des transformations en oubliant de côté toutes ces catégories de personnes qui ont un rôle important à jouer, et donc la jeunesse. Et nous savons aujourd'hui que la jeunesse trouve le travail agricole de la production comme un travail difficile à travers le continent. Mais je pense qu'en adoptant une approche basée sur les chaînes de valeur, on pourra trouver des maillons sur lesquels notre jeunesse peut s'intégrer et créer justement de l'emploi qui soit des emplois verts. Et c'est cela que notre partenaire, Agra et UNDP, qui sont en train de nous appuyer à rendre nos chaînes de valeur aussi vertes. Donc, je crois qu'il y a des niches, qu'il y a des opportunités pour la jeunesse de pouvoir s'impliquer aussi dans le travail que nous faisons, et également pour les femmes dont le rôle est important dans ce travail. Donc, je voudrais m'arrêter là-bas. Ce sont les éléments clés que j'ai notés. Je pense que nous sommes déjà sur le chantier. Nous y travaillons déjà. Maintenant, il faut redoubler d'efforts. Il faut aller de l'avant pour qu'à la fin, nous soyons à mesure de pouvoir atteindre les résultats escomptés. Merci, Constant. Je pourrais revenir s'il y a des questions. Merci.
Superb. Thank you so much, Junkie. I really appreciate, and I'm so glad that you raised the issue of youth, because I think we've all now turned our attention and said, this has got to happen. This has got to happen. And there's so many opportunities for that. I'd love now to turn to Jean-Marc, Jean-Marc with the Jeff Secretariat. And Jeff is really working to catalyze so many of these elements. And Jean-Marc, you have the floor.
Merci Constance et merci à tous d'être là. Pas vraiment de surprise, ça va être en continuité effectivement d'un certain nombre d'éléments qui ont été dits, mais en tout cas, merci à tous les intervenants d'avoir facilité cette introduction et merci à Constance pour sa coordination très agréable. Donc la raison d'être ou la raison de la présence du FEM, du Fonds pour l'environnement mondial ici, est un petit peu comme Constance l'a dit, d'avoir un rôle catalytique et de relier un petit peu différents thèmes tous ensemble, liés, que ce soit l'agriculture, que ce soit la restauration de la nature, que ce soit la protection de la nature, que ce soit la gestion de l'eau, et donc liés à la sécurité alimentaire. Donc, pour ceux qui découvrent le FEM est le mécanisme ou un mécanisme de financement de 5 accords internationaux liés à l'environnement, sur l'atténuation des changements climatiques, la biodiversité, la lutte contre la dégradation des terres, 2 accords internationaux sur les produits chimiques. Et il y a un thème sur lequel il n'y a pas d'accord international, mais sur lequel on finance des accords transfrontaliers liés à la ressource, liés à la gestion partagée des ressources en eau. Et en fait, dans le cadre de ces différents mandats, on aide les pays à définir des stratégies et des plans d'action. Donc, vous connaissez pour la plupart ces acronymes qu'on utilise très souvent, comme les NDC, les NAP ou les PAN, suivant si on utilise des acronymes en français ou en anglais, NBSAP, etc. Et un de notre travail, une de nos missions, c'est de s'assurer que le contenu de ces stratégies et de ces actions soit cohérent. Et je pense que c'est quelque chose dont on va parler de plus en plus, c'est la cohérence des politiques, que ce soit la cohérence des politiques sectorielles liées à l'environnement, à l'eau, à l'agriculture, à l'aménagement des territoires, et savoir que ces stratégies, ces actions soient cohérentes également dans la mise en œuvre. Donc, je pense que c'est un des sujets de discussion que nous avons au niveau du FEM, qu'on va développer pendant cette session et un petit peu plus tard également. Donc, les messages un petit peu à faire passer sont liés, je dirais, au fondement du programme sur les systèmes alimentaires résilients. Je vous rappelle que ce programme était un des 3 pilotes en fait, d'approche intégrée et que en fait, la structure même du programme traduit en fait, un certain nombre d'hypothèses que nous avions faites en utilisant les résultats des évaluations de programmes précédents ou des cycles précédents, et également des messages d'un certain nombre de rapports internationaux, et également les messages de différentes conventions et de décisions de différentes COP qui avaient été prises précédemment. Donc en fait, la structure du programme, et vous retrouverez, et là je pense que je vais parler un langage que toutes les équipes de projet vont bien retrouver, puisque tous les projets sont basés à peu près sur la même structure. Après, suivant les points d'entrée dans les pays, certaines parties sont plus développées que d'autres. Mais je pense que le premier point et la première composante est liée au cadre institutionnel. Et lorsqu'on parle des cadres institutionnels, c'est un petit peu ce que plusieurs de mes prédécesseurs ont dit, c'est comment faire travailler les gens ensemble des différents secteurs et à différents niveaux. Que ce soit au niveau des paysages, que ce soit au niveau régional ou provincial ou départemental suivant les pays, au niveau national, et puis après encore plus compliqué, c'est au niveau de la sous-région, que l'on parle du Sahel ou de la Corne de l'Afrique ou de l'Afrique australe ou de l'Afrique ou du continent, comment les pays peuvent échanger et se mettre d'accord sur un certain nombre de mesures, d'axes et de manières de faire. Donc, la première partie, le cadre institutionnel, je pense extrêmement important et je pense qu'on a tous testé dans le cadre du programme RFS différents modes de plateforme, parce que quand les choses ne sont pas institutionnalisées, justement, lorsque les institutions n'existent pas, il faut arriver à mettre en place des formes assez souples pour faire travailler les gens ensemble. Et donc, on a des plateformes à différents niveaux, au niveau des paysages, au niveau des provinces, au niveau national et au niveau sous-régional. La deuxième composante que vous connaissez bien et que toutes les équipes de projet sur le terrain connaissent bien, c'est la manière de mettre à l'échelle. Comment mettre à l'échelle un certain nombre de pratiques qui sont connues, que ce soit pour l'agriculture, la protection de la nature, la restauration, et comment, là encore, faire travailler des acteurs ensemble qui dépendent des secteurs des forêts, de l'agriculture, de l'eau, et arriver à avoir des mesures à l'échelle, puisque ce qui nous intéresse, en fin de compte, au niveau du FEM, c'est après la génération de bénéfices pour la planète. Donc, il faut, en termes, lorsqu'on va parler de superficie bien gérée ou de superficie restaurée, il faut que ça soit il faut atteindre une certaine masse critique pour que les bénéfices, que ce soit en biodiversité, en nature ou en carbone, soient bons pour la planète. La troisième composante, c'est l'évaluation, le suivi et l'évaluation, pas exactement des projets, mais de ce qui nous a intéressé dans le cadre du programme RFS, c'était de voir comment justement les bénéfices environnementaux et des aspects un peu plus horizontaux, comme la résilience, étaient liés. Et donc, il y a eu plusieurs partenaires qui se sont acharnés à travailler ensemble aussi et à trouver des liens entre différents outils. Je pense que l'ICRAF, avec le FIDA, avec ses différents partenaires, FAO, avec Conservation International, ont travaillé ensemble pour ajuster un certain nombre d'outils et les mettre à disposition des différentes équipes de projet. La quatrième composante, et on en a tous parlé d'une manière ou d'une autre, c'est la gestion des connaissances. Et je pense que plus ça va, plus la gestion des connaissances doit prendre une part importante dans le cadre de nos projets et de nos programmes, et que plus ça va, et plus il va falloir avoir vraiment des stratégies et des manières de définir les approches de gestion des connaissances, en fait, avoir le même niveau de précision que l'on a sur les autres composantes, avec effectivement des cibles, avec des indicateurs, et voir après comment relier. L'intérêt, ce n'est pas de produire des connaissances pour des connaissances, mais c'est de voir comment ces connaissances vont être mobilisées pour communiquer, et souvent pour communiquer à des gens qui n'ont pas le même langage. Les gens qui travaillent dans les finances n'ont pas le même langage que ceux qui travaillent dans la protection de la nature ou dans l'agriculture ou dans la forêt. Et donc, il faut arriver à avoir un langage commun. Et tout ça doit amener à un certain nombre de changements de pratiques, changements de comportement. Et je pense que c'est le futur et la manière de définir ces composantes de gestion des connaissances, où il va falloir effectivement encore plus professionnaliser et préparer ce genre d'intervention. Alors, ces quatre grandes composantes qu'on retrouve à l'échelle du programme et qu'on retrouve à l'échelle des projets, ils devaient tous intégrer un certain nombre d'éléments transversaux. Je vais juste les mentionner pour ne pas être trop long, mais je pense que c'est des éléments qu'on va retrouver au cours de notre discussion aujourd'hui. L'importance de l'intégration des aspects de genre, et quand je pense à l'approche genre, je pense surtout aux aspects d'inégalité qui existent entre les sexes, entre hommes et femmes, particulièrement dans le secteur de l'agriculture. Donc, qui a le droit, qui a le droit d'avoir un compte en banque, qui a le droit de gérer l'argent, qui va bénéficier des ressources dans le cadre d'un programme ou des dons, etc. Il y a plusieurs niveaux à aborder, mais ces aspects de genre sont extrêmement importants et je pense le seront encore plus dans les programmes ou les projets futurs. Le deuxième point, on en a un petit peu parlé, c'est l'importance du secteur privé. Je pense que le contexte institutionnel est une chose avec les acteurs étatiques, gouvernementaux, non gouvernementaux, mais pour la mise à l'échelle, l'implication du secteur privé est importante et c'est ce qu'on apprend et c'est ce qu'on a pu découvrir dans le cadre de la deuxième composante du programme RFS. Troisièmement, c'est la résilience des écosystèmes et la résilience des populations à résister en fait à des chocs. Ces chocs peuvent être la sécheresse, peuvent être des problèmes d'eau, des problèmes de climat. Et je pense que ces aspects de résilience sont un des aspects transversaux importants sur lesquels il faut qu'on poursuive les efforts. Le quatrième point, c'est l'engagement des acteurs. On l'a vu à différents niveaux, donc différents acteurs qui, des fois, ne travaillent pas ensemble, des fois n'ont pas exactement le même langage. Donc, comment les faire travailler ensemble? Et donc, le cinquième point transversal, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est la gestion des connaissances. Et là encore, une gestion des connaissances orientée vers l'action, orientée vers un changement de pratique et un changement de comportement. Voilà, je m'arrête là pour l'instant, mais merci beaucoup de ce panel.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marc. All right, I would like to invite everyone to click on gallery mode so we can all come back into the same space so we can see everyone. And I think that this has just been enormously helpful to hear from all of our esteemed speakers. I realize that we're going to run short on time. I did want to compliment also Jean-Marc for bringing this idea. Thank you for policy coherence, because policy coherence will definitely be a driver of greater integration. And I do have I also wanted to say that I feel like we've heard some hot off the press ideas coming out of the various agenda, but we've also heard where people have already made great success in this linkage between science, practice, and policy to address these agenda. So a lot of existing success. And then on top of that, some direction, some new and positive areas of focus for each of us. And I think that it's just incredibly important that we have gotten a very optimistic view from all of our panelists that these things exist to build on. Let's go forward and make it happen. I did just want to check in. I think that there might be a quick couple of questions. I realized that we're out of time. I wanted to just check quickly and see if Mira wanted to invite her question. Mira is with the Malabo Montpellier panel, and I don't know if she's still with us and if she might want to ask a question from the vantage point of that panel. Mira, are you with us? Okay, if not, then she was very interested in some of the elements that had come out of Nature Day at the COP26, which really brought businesses and governments together, and the the Europe and Africa connection. So, and I guess that we probably, I'm looking at my co-facilitators, we probably need to wrap up. People have been incredibly generous with their time. I really want to take the opportunity to say thank you again, Manyewu and Nora and of course, George, for setting the stage and giving us so much to think about. And I feel like we've had a word cloud of very interesting ideas. And I just want to let people know that there will be a report that comes out of this that synthesizes what we've heard and allows us to reflect back on this. And going into the next, we do have an upcoming event on advocacy for resilient food systems coming up in another week. And I think most of our colleagues will have seen the announcement for that. Ravi had to step out for a Board of Trustees meeting. So may I just open the mics? Jean-Marc, I had invited you to make closing remarks, but you ended up being the last speaker, as we've seen, but I don't know if you want to make any last remark for the group.
Thank you, Constance. I guess I shared the point I wanted to share, and we'll be a little bit later after the second part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, and those of you who can turn on your screens, I would love it if you would show your videos. I'm seeing a lot of our country project leads coming in. I see Anthony, I saw Joseph, and I'm so grateful that we've had our RFS colleagues, but we've also had a wealth of people that are both starting new projects and are designing projects, investing in projects. I feel like we've been able to really have a wealth of shared experience. I only wish we had more time for dialogue, and thank you again. Please take off your mics and feel free to say goodbye, hello, take care, be healthy, please.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye. Thank you for the interpreters.
Bye.
And Constance, excellent.
Well, goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you to our excellent speakers. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to Pierre for keeping us on track technically. And thank you, Berara. It's great to see you. Samuel, Stefano, superb.
Hi, Alfred.
Hi.
Hi, Alfred.
Hi,
Yes.
Birara, Alfred, Joseph.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Sylvester. Superb. Let's see. Yes. And great to see the smiling faces. All right. Well, I know you will look forward to the final report. I invite you all. Oh, Habib, fantastic. It's good to see you. So we have a great crowd, and I just want to tell everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to working with the information that we've exchanged during this session. And thank you again to our esteemed speakers. Thank you to Anne-Sophie for hosting us on this event. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you to you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Barak.
Bon afternoon.